I see the shadows fall around me now, catching dreams that never look so clear. All these badges, they won't make me proud, but the battles keep me facing fear.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Brandmaster Chess Channel. You've reached Stage 1, Level 1, where we're going to learn the basics of how to move the pieces and the rules of the game. Do you have what it takes to take up the challenge of chess? Let's find out. So, the game of chess is played on a chessboard that looks like this. And to look at the board itself, there's 8 squares going up and down, 8 squares going left and right. Altogether, that's 64 squares, alternating light and dark squares. Now, usually there's a dark square on the left corner of your board. So when you're setting up the board for the first time, you need to make sure there's a dark square on the bottom left corner. Usually it's going to be A1 or H8. This is the starting position you're going to see in chess. Black is always on the side with H8 as the dark square, and white is always the side with A1. Now, what are all these pieces we're looking at? Well, these pieces right here are known as the pawns. Each side gets 8 pawns that are always going to start off on this second row, and the 7th row for black. After that, we have the rooks. Both sides get 2 rooks. And the way I like to think about it, the rooks are, if chess is like a kingdom, then these rooks right here are going to be your castle. And the castle usually surrounds the king. So that's why the castles are always on the corners, protecting their kingdom. Then, the piece right next to it is going to be the knight. And that's going to be these horses right here. Each side gets 2 knights, and they go right next to the rook. And the way I like to think about it is, the knights protect the rooks. The knights protect the castle. So that's why they always go right next to it. After that, you have the bishops. Each side gets 2 bishops. These are going to be these pointy guys right here. I don't really have a way to remember, but process of elimination, you know the rooks go first, and then the knights, and then the bishops. After that, the queen always goes on her own color. So the white queen will always go on a light square, and the king will always be right next to it. And that's how you set up the game. Now, how do you play this game? Well, the white pieces always go first, and then after that, every piece gets 1 move per turn. Black goes, white goes, black goes. And that continues until one side checkmates the other, or if the game ends in a draw. We'll go more into that later, but that's the general idea of how the rules are in the game. Now let's introduce the pieces and see how they move. First, we're going to look at the pawns. Now, all the pawns usually start on the second rank like this. Now, when the pawns start out, they have 2 options. They can move up 1 square, or they can move up 2 squares. Now, whichever one you choose, if a pawn moves, any move after that, it can only move 1 square forward. So this pawn can only move up once, and this pawn can only move up once. Now, even though the pawns move up forwards like this, they cannot capture a piece that moves forward. So if there's a pawn in front of it, the pawn can't capture this pawn. The way this pawn captures is one square diagonally like this. So if black were to put a pawn here, white can capture the pawn by moving it on top of it like this. Now, two other important details. So if you have a pawn that's in their side of on your opponent's side of the board, if a pawn moves up twice, crossing one of your pawn's attacking squares, you have the opportunity to capture it, and this is known as en passant. This only works if the pawn crosses one of the attacking squares to get to where it's going. Notice if the pawn was here and they did this, the pawn wouldn't be crossing any attacking squares to get where it went. So the en passant rule doesn't work. It only works if the pawn crosses the attacking square, which is right here. Even though it's moving up twice, it technically crossed its attacking square, giving white a chance to capture it if he wants to. And the last rule to know when it comes to the pawn, if the pawn gets to the other side of the board, so let's just say the pawn kept going and eventually it got to the other side like this, you have the opportunity to change that pawn to any other piece in the game besides the king. So you can change it to a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight. Most of the time the queen's the best way to go, but there are some situations where one of these other pieces will be better. So we'll learn more about that later on, but it's just good to know that if you get your pawn to the other side of the board, you can make a queen or any other piece. And usually that's how games are usually won in the end of the game, where if all there's left is pawns, it comes down to one side getting their pawn to the other side to queen and then win the game. That takes care of the pawn. Now let's take a look at the rook. The rook can move any number of squares going up, down, left, and right. And besides the pawn, all the other pieces attack the same squares they move to. So in this case, the rook is attacking all of the squares it's currently moving to. We'll cover that more in depth in stage 2. Now, if there's a piece in the way, your rook cannot move past a piece that's in its way. If your own piece is in the way, it can't do anything. You cannot capture your own pieces. None of your pieces can ever capture any of your own pieces. So if your own piece is blocking your piece's path, then you have to either move that piece out of the way somehow, or just move your rook away where it's no longer blocking its path. If your opponent's piece is in the way, you still can't go past it. You can't go to this square. You cannot go there. But you do have the option to capture this pawn if you want to. And you just hover over here and take it like that. Next, we have the bishop. It's the same exact rule as the rook, except for they move diagonally, kind of like in an X formation like this. If you want to think about it, the rook kind of moves in a plus sign, stretching out in as far as it can go. And the bishop moves in an X formation, stretching as far as it can go. But it's the same exact rules. It cannot capture its own pieces, and if it's your opponent's piece, you can capture it, but you can't ever pass the piece that's blocking it. Next, we have the queen. This combines the rook and the bishop together into one piece, which means it can go left, up, right, down, and diagonally, making it one of the most powerful pieces in the game. But it also cannot pass a piece in its way. If it's your opponent's piece, they can take it. If it's your own piece, then you just can't do anything. This is the only square you can go to. But you can move your queen out of the way to where now it has more squares it can go to. All right. Now we're going to tackle the knight. The knight is one of the trickiest pieces in the game because it basically moves in an L-like shape. So this is the L, and the L rotates. So you can rotate the L, and the end point of the L will always be where your L can move, where your knight can move. So in this example, the L looks like this, and your knight can go there. It can also go this way and then this way. If the L isn't working for you, the other way to think about it is it has a 2-1 step. It can go 2 steps in one direction and then 1 step in another. It can go 1 step in a direction and 2 steps in the other. It can either do a 1-2 step or a 2-1 step in any direction. And this is all one move for the knight. So in the game, you can basically move to any of these squares. Now, an important thing to know, the knight is the only piece that can jump over other pieces. So even though it's stuck behind these pawns, the knight can still jump over to get to where it wants to go. You cannot capture your own pieces still. So in this example, the knight cannot go here because your pawn's in the way. But you can capture your opponent's pieces. So here, if you look at the L, you can either capture this pawn or you can capture this pawn. And so that's how the knight moves. Last but not least, we have the king. The king can move any number of squares in any can move 1 square in any direction of the board. So it can go here, 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 and here. Now, if a piece attacks the king, if an opposing piece attacks your king, this is called a check. So a check is when a piece is attacking your king. Once you're in check, you are required to get your king out of check. Otherwise, you would lose the game. So here you would have to move your piece to a square not being occupied by this bishop to get your king to safety. So, in this example, you also cannot move your king onto a square where it would be checked. So like in this example here, this bishop is currently able to go to these squares. Oops. All right, there we go. So that means the king cannot go to one of these 2 squares, otherwise it would get captured and lose the game. Now, if we put the king down here for a second. So if the king is attacked, it's put in check, and it has no way of escape, nothing that can block the check, then it's going to be checkmate. So in this example, if we put the rook down here like this, it attacks the king, and the king has no way to get out. If we look at this scenario, if black tries to check them, the king can't escape, but they do have a way to block the check by bringing the bishop back like this. So it's important to recognize pieces that can block the check. If there are no pieces that can block, then the king can't get out. That's how you checkmate your opponent. And that basically covers how all the pieces move. Now, how do we practice this? I personally advocate for free resources. I don't like paying anything, and especially starting out something you haven't done yet. This is why I like lichess.org. I'll still play my games on chess.com, and I like their free stuff a little bit, but Lichess has a little bit more for those that just want a free resource to use, I think. So I would definitely create an account on lichess.org, and then what you can do is you can go over to this tab where it says Learn at the top, and you can use this Chess Basics tab, and it'll give you a way to practice and learn how these pieces move more in depth. And then you could even stretch out into the fundamentals and try to learn these ones as well. I'm actually going to have stage 2 kind of cover the more advanced things you can do with your pieces. For now, for stage 1, we're focusing on how the pieces move in general, which are going to be these guys right here. So what you would do is you would click on one of these, and what it's going to do is it's going to have you try to capture these stars, and as you solve them, they'll get a little bit harder. Okay. So that basically wraps up stage 1. Congratulations, guys. You now learned what it takes to accomplish stage 1. Once you feel like you know how the pieces move and the rules of the game, you are now ready to advance to level 2, where we'll learn how to utilize those pieces to accomplish things by attacking, defending, and coordinating. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.